Hunger doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers through the eyes of a child. It was a cold evening in the city, lights glowing, people laughing, and no one noticing the little girl sitting by the park bench. Her clothes were worn, her hands tucked into her sleeves for warmth, watching others eat like it was a movie she could never join. Jasonstatham sat a few feet away, finishing a small meal from a local charity stall, just another quiet night after a long week. But then came a soft voice that froze him mid-bite. "Sir, can I lick your plate, please?" He looked up and saw her, eyes wide, lips trembling, not from fear but from hunger. And in that instant, the noise of the city vanished. Because no fight, no stunt, no fame had ever broken him like those 6 words did. Before we continue, thank you for watching and supporting our stories. These moments, the quiet, human ones, are why we tell them. If you believe kindness still matters in a world that often forgets it, make sure to subscribe and stay with us. Every view, every share, helps us bring more of these real, emotional stories to life. The city had already started to quiet down, the hum of traffic thinning as night settled over the streets. Streetlights flickered, some glowing steady, others buzzing faintly like they were tired too. Near the edge of a small park beside a row of closed food stalls, a few people lingered, the kind who didn't have anywhere else to be. Jasonstatham sat on an old bench near the fountain, a paper plate balanced on his knees. The food was simple: rice, stew, and a slice of bread handed out by the volunteers from a nearby shelter. He wasn't homeless, but lately he'd been showing up at the shelter just to help with the serving line, to see the faces that reminded him of where he'd come from. Tonight, after hours of lifting boxes and handing out meals, he'd finally sat down for his own. The steam from the stew curled into the cold night air, carrying that comforting smell of something warm, something made with care. He wasn't thinking about much, just letting his mind drift. The day had been long, his shoulders sore, his heart heavier than he'd admit. Sometimes the world felt too cruel for too long, and even the strong needed quiet. That's when he noticed movement. A small figure across the park, sitting beside a trash bin, her knees pulled tight against her chest. At first, he thought she was waiting for someone. But then she moved closer, just a few steps at a time, like a stray animal testing if it was safe to be seen. Her shoes were too big. Her jacket, if you could call it that, was a man's coat, frayed and dragging against the ground. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. The way she walked, slow and cautious, said everything. She was used to being ignored, maybe even used to danger. Jason didn't move. He'd learned that silence was safer for moments like this. She stopped a few feet away, her eyes locked on the plate in his hands. Then her voice, barely a whisper, broke through the night. "Sir, can I lick your plate?" The words hit him harder than any punch ever had. For a moment he didn't understand, not because of the words themselves, but because of how she said them. No shame, no drama, just honesty, like a child asking the time. He blinked once, trying to steady his breath. "You hungry?" She nodded once. Her hair fell in front of her face, tangled and unwashed. She tried to stand a little taller as if to prove she was fine, but her voice trembled. "I don't need food, sir. I just want to taste it." Jason felt something twist inside him, something deep, old, and raw. He'd seen hardship. He'd grown up around it. But seeing it this small, this human, stripped of every layer of pride, it hit different. He glanced down at the plate. A few grains of rice, a smear of sauce. It wasn't much, but to her it might as well have been gold. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he set the plate aside and took off his jacket. "Come here," he said softly. The girl hesitated, eyes darting around. Trust didn't come easy to people who had to survive this way. But something in his voice, the calm, the steadiness, made her take a small step forward. Then another. Jason reached into the small paper bag beside him and pulled out half a piece of bread he'd saved. "Here," he said, handing it to her. She didn't take it immediately. "You'll be hungry," she whispered. He smiled faintly, shaking his head. "I've had worse days." When she finally took the bread, she didn't eat it right away. She just held it for a moment like it was fragile. Then, carefully, she tore it in half and offered the other piece back to him. That simple gesture nearly broke him. Jason took the bread but didn't eat. He watched her instead. The way she chewed slowly, savoring every bite, her eyes half closed like she was trying to memorize the taste. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Ella." "That's a good name," he said. "You here alone?" She nodded. "Mama's sick. She sleeps most days. I go out when she's too tired." Jason's throat tightened. "Where do you live?" She pointed across the park, toward an alley between two buildings. A tarp and some cardboard leaned against the wall. There. The cold breeze cut through his shirt. He wanted to ask 100 questions, wanted to fix everything right then, but he also knew you don't rush people like her. You earn trust the slow way. "Wait here," he said. He stood, picked up his jacket, and started walking toward the shelter across the street. But before he could take another step, he heard her small voice again. "Sir." He turned. She looked up, clutching the bread with both hands. "Thank you for not pretending not to see me." That stopped him dead. He nodded once, just enough for her to see that it mattered. Then he walked to the shelter and came back with a tray of food: stew, rice, fruit, and a cup of hot cocoa. She blinked at the sight of it, her small fingers gripping the edge of the tray like she thought it might disappear. "It's okay," Jason said. "It's yours." She sat down on the bench beside him. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. She ate quietly, carefully, like she'd learned to make small bites last longer. When she was halfway through, she said softly, "Mama used to make food like this, before she got sick." Jason looked at her. "Where's your dad?" Her face went blank for a second. That practiced emptiness kids learn too early. "He left." He nodded slowly, not pushing further. Some answers don't need to be forced. A gust of wind blew through the park, rustling the paper plate. Jason noticed her shiver again. Without saying a word, he draped his jacket over her shoulders. "It's okay," she murmured. "You'll get cold." "I've been colder," he replied. She smiled faintly for the first time. "You talk funny." He chuckled. "I've been told that." By the time she finished eating, the park had emptied. The lights around them buzzed faintly, casting long shadows on the pavement. Jason glanced toward the alley where she said her mother was. "Do you want me to walk you back?" he asked. She hesitated. "You don't have to." "I know," he said gently, "but I want to." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. They crossed the park slowly, Jason carrying the tray, Ella holding what was left of her bread. When they reached the alley, he saw the makeshift shelter she'd pointed to: a pile of blankets, a few plastic bags, and the faint sound of someone coughing. A woman lay curled up on the ground, her face pale and thin, her breath shallow. Jason crouched beside her. "She needs help," he murmured. Ella knelt beside her mother, touching her hand. "She gets better when it's warm." Jason took out his phone. "I'll call someone. She needs to see a doctor." The little girl's eyes widened with panic. "No, please, they'll take her away. They always do." He froze. He'd heard that fear before, the kind born from systems that promise help but take family instead. He put the phone away slowly. "All right, no calls." Instead, he stood and looked around. The nearest building had a small sign: Community Cafe, closed for renovation. He tried the door. It was locked, but he could see the space inside was empty, clean, dry. He'd helped renovate places like that before, and he still had a few favors left in town. "Come on," he said softly. "You both can't stay here tonight." Within an hour, he'd made a call to a friend from the shelter, a woman named Marta who managed a temporary safe space for families. By midnight, Ella and her mother were wrapped in real blankets, lying on real beds under a roof that didn't leak. When he checked on them one last time, Ella was already asleep, her tiny hand clutching the sleeve of her mother's coat. Marta looked at him from the doorway. "You sure you don't want to stay?" Jason shook his head. "They're the ones who needed saving tonight." As he stepped back into the night, the air felt colder but lighter. He walked past the bench where it had all started. The plate was gone, the park empty again. But in his chest, something had shifted, something small, maybe, but powerful. For the first time in a long while, Jason realized that sometimes the world doesn't change with grand gestures or loud victories. Sometimes it changes with one simple question, asked by a child who just wanted to feel seen. The next morning, sunlight pushed through the cracks in the old cafe's curtains, soft, golden, and warm, the kind that makes everything look a little more forgiving. Jason stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching the world wake up. Outside, cars passed, people hurried to work, and for once the city didn't feel so cold. Behind him, he heard the quiet rustle of movement. Ella sat up on the couch where she'd slept, blinking at the light. Her small face peeked out from beneath the oversized jacket he'd given her, and for a second, she looked like any other kid waking up after a long night, sleepy, safe, unafraid. "Morning," Jason said softly. She rubbed her eyes. "You stayed." He smiled faintly, didn't have anywhere else to be. She tilted her head. People always have somewhere else to be. He thought about that for a moment. Maybe, but sometimes the right place is just where you're needed most. Her mother was still asleep in the next room, her breathing steadier, the color in her face returning. Marta had managed to bring in medicine and food during the night, promising Jason that they'd help the woman recover before arranging something more stable. Jason didn't want thanks, he just wanted them safe. "Do you go to school?" he asked, pouring her a cup of warm milk. Ella shook her head. "Not anymore, we move too much. Mama says we'll go back when we can." He slid the cup toward her. "You like reading?" She nodded, a shy spark lighting her eyes. "I used to read at the library when they'd let me. I liked stories with heroes." Jason smiled. "Heroes, huh? What kind?" "The quiet ones," she said. "The ones who don't wear capes, the ones who fix things." That answer sat with him longer than it should have. He looked at her, really looked, and saw something he hadn't seen in years, a child who'd already learned what most adults still didn't understand. Before he could reply, there was a knock at the door. Marta peeked in, holding a clipboard. "The doctor says her mother's stable for now. We can transfer her to our recovery center later today." Jason nodded. "Good." Marta hesitated, her voice lowering. "You did more than most would." He didn't answer. He didn't do it for credit. After breakfast, while Marta stepped out to make calls, Jason sat beside Ella again. She was drawing something on a napkin with a broken pencil stub, lines and shapes that didn't quite make sense until he leaned closer. It was a picture of a park bench and two people, a man and a little girl, one plate between them. He smiled. "That us?" She nodded proudly. "You don't look right, though. You're supposed to smile." "Do I not smile much?" She shook her head. "You smile with your eyes, not your mouth." He laughed quietly. "Fair enough." Then out of nowhere she asked, "Are you famous?" He blinked. "What makes you say that?" "You walk like someone who's used to people moving out of the way," she said simply. "And everyone looked at you at the shelter, even the workers." Jason didn't respond right away. Fame had never meant much to him, not anymore. But hearing it from her, so observant, so innocent, reminded him of how visible he could still be in a world where she was. "I used to be," he said finally. "Now I just try to be useful." "Useful is better than famous," she said, without missing a beat. He nodded slowly. "You're not wrong." Hours passed. The city outside grew louder again, kids laughing on their way to school, buses honking, the ordinary rhythm of life resuming. But inside that little cafe, time felt different, softer. Around noon, Marta returned. "We're ready to move them," she said. "The clinic has space for the week. After that, we'll find something longer term." Jason knelt beside Ella's mother, who was now awake but weak. She looked at him through tired, grateful eyes. "You didn't have to do all this," she murmured. He shrugged. "Maybe not, but I'm glad I did." She tried to sit up, her voice trembling. "People usually walk past us, or they stare. You didn't." Jason met her gaze. "Everyone needs help sometimes. You just got unlucky with who was around when you needed it." Her lips quivered, a small, broken smile forming. "You sound like my late husband." He stood, unsure how to answer that, and instead turned to Ella. "You ready?" She nodded. "Are you coming?" "Not this time," he said softly, "but you'll be okay." She frowned, holding onto his sleeve. "How do you know?" "Because you already survived the hardest part," he said, "and because there are good people still left like Marta here." She looked at Marta, then back at him. "You promise?" Jason knelt, his voice steady. "I promise." When they left, he stayed behind in the empty cafe. The silence returned, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. Still, something tugged at him, the kind of feeling that doesn't let you move on easily. He walked outside into the sunlight. The park bench across the street was still there. On the ground beside it, half buried in the dirt, was the napkin she'd drawn on. The wind had caught it and carried it halfway to the curb. He picked it up, brushed off the dust, and folded it carefully into his pocket. For the next few days, Jason couldn't shake the memory, the voice, the look in her eyes when she said those words, "Can I lick your plate?" It echoed at odd hours during his morning runs, while he made coffee, when he passed strangers on the street. So he did what he always did when something stayed with him too long. He took action. He called Marta a week later. "How's she doing?" "She's better," Marta said, a smile in her voice. "Her mother's recovering slowly, and Ella, she's something else, already helping the staff, reading to the younger kids." Jason exhaled, relief mixing with pride. "Good, that's good." "You know," Marta added, "she talks about you a lot. She thinks you're some kind of guardian angel." He chuckled softly. "Let's not ruin the myth." But he didn't hang up. "Marta, I've got a favor to ask." And over the next month, things started to change. The clinic turned into something more. Jason quietly funded repairs, supplies, and new beds, anonymously, of course. When the staff asked where the donations came from, Marta just smiled and said, "A friend." Ella and her mother moved into a small apartment nearby. Nothing fancy, 2 rooms, clean walls, a window that opened to real light. Jason visited once under the excuse of dropping off supplies. Ella opened the door, grinning from ear to ear. "You came back," she said, hugging his leg before he could even step in. "Had to make sure you weren't bossing the doctors around," he teased. She rolled her eyes. "Only sometimes." Her mother appeared from the kitchen, stronger now, holding a cup of tea. "You've done more than we can ever repay." Jason waved it off. "You don't owe me anything, just promise me one thing." "What's that?" He looked at Ella, "That she never forgets to dream again." Her mother nodded, tears welling. "She won't." That evening, as he left their apartment, Jason stopped at a nearby bench, not unlike the one where it all began. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement, reflections rippling like fading memories. He pulled the folded napkin from his pocket, the one with the drawing, and smoothed it out on his knee. The ink had smudged, but the shapes were still there. The man, the girl, the plate. He smiled faintly. Then, for the first time in a long while, he whispered to himself, "You did all right, mate." Weeks later, Ella's story quietly spread through the shelter volunteers, through Marta's team, through strangers who'd heard about the little girl who once asked to lick a plate but now helped hand them out. She started a small board near the clinic's kitchen, where she wrote messages in colorful chalk. "No one should go to bed hungry." "Kindness doesn't expire." "Food tastes better when shared." And beneath those words, taped carefully, was her napkin drawing, the one Jason had secretly returned during one of his quiet visits. He didn't sign it, he didn't have to. Because in the end, the story didn't belong to him anymore. It belonged to the girl who taught him that hunger, the real kind, isn't just about empty stomachs. It's about empty hearts. And that night, as he walked away from the clinic, the air smelled faintly of bread and stew again, like warmth, like memory, like home. Jason glanced back once, saw the lights glowing through the window, and smiled. Some stories end in noise. The best ones end in silence, the kind that says everything you need to know.